In the chilling world of death row, where time stands still and justice takes decades to arrive, one name has suddenly re-emerged: Anthony Todd Boyd. A man whose execution shocked America and reignited the global debate over the death penalty. This is the haunting true crime documentary of a man accused of one of Alabama's most brutal murders, and the final hours that would turn into a national controversy. Boyd's case wasn't just another statistic on death row. It became a symbol of modern America's most controversial experiment in capital punishment, the nitrogen gas execution. A method so untested, so debated, that many wondered, did Alabama just cross a moral line? But behind the headlines of cruelty and crime lies a much deeper story. A story of poverty, addiction, betrayal, and a justice system many say was stacked against him from the start. Hit that like button and subscribe to be part of our growing community. Before the headlines, before the gas mask, before the name Anthony Todd Boyd echoed through the chambers of Alabama's death row, there was simply Tony, a quiet boy born into a world that offered him little more than pain, poverty, and survival. Anthony grew up in Anniston, Alabama, a town marked by racial tension, economic decline, and neighborhoods where the American dream had long been abandoned. For many kids there, life wasn't about chasing dreams. It was about making it to the next day. He was raised in a home where money was tight, jobs were scarce, and hope was a luxury few could afford. Neighbors recall that the Boyd family did what they could, but times were harsh, and like many children from broken homes, Anthony learned early on how fragile stability could be. As a teenager, he drifted, not because he was violent or heartless, but because the world around him felt like quicksand. Each decision, each small mistake, dragged him deeper into a place where second chances didn't exist. By the late 1980s, Anniston had become a small-town battlefield. Crack cocaine was tearing through the streets, families were collapsing under addiction, and unemployment left young men like Anthony searching for an identity, or at least an escape. And that's where things began to unravel. At first, Anthony's involvement was small, a few deals here, a few favors there, but the deeper he went, the darker the company he kept. The streets taught him lessons the classroom never could: trust no one, show no weakness, and never, ever owe a debt. Behind the tough exterior, however, was a man struggling with fear, addiction, and a deep sense of failure. Those close to him said he wasn't a monster. He was a man trying to hold on to something in a world that kept slipping away. Psychologists who later studied his case noted signs of emotional immaturity, possible trauma, and an inability to process guilt or fear in a healthy way. He wasn't born evil. He was shaped by neglect, desperation, and survival. And like so many young men lost in that same struggle, he started to believe the lie, that the streets were the only path left. But in 1993, that lie would explode into one of the most horrific acts of violence Alabama had ever seen. The story goes that a man named Gregory Huguley owed a small drug debt, about $200. A sum so small, yet deadly in that world. Rumors began to spread, tempers flared, and within days a plan was born among a group of men determined to make an example out of him. One of those men was Anthony Boyd, or so the prosecutors would say. Because here's where the story fractures, where perception and truth begin to blur. Some say Boyd led the charge. Others insist he was there but terrified, forced to play along with men far more dangerous than himself. And decades later, even as his execution drew near, that question still hung in the air like a ghost. Was Anthony Todd Boyd truly a killer, or just another casualty of a system that failed him long before the crime was committed? In interviews from prison, Boyd maintained his innocence, saying he had nothing to do with Gregory's death, that he was at a party that night, miles away from the scene of the crime. His words were calm, too calm, some said. Others heard pain, regret, and exhaustion, the sound of a man worn down by 30 years of waiting for death. But whether you believe his story or not, one truth remains. Anthony Boyd was a product of an environment where violence was currency and poverty was destiny. Could he have escaped it? Maybe. Should society have done more to stop it? Definitely. But by the summer of 1993, the choices were made, the paths were crossed, and fate was about to demand its payment. Because on one hot Alabama night, the debt that started over $200 would end with a man burned alive. It was the summer of 1993, hot, heavy, and unforgiving in Anniston, Alabama, a town where small debts could turn deadly and trust could vanish in a heartbeat. That's when two men's lives collided, Gregory Huguley and Anthony Todd Boyd. Gregory wasn't a saint. He had his struggles, small-time hustling, the kind of things desperate people did to get by. But those who knew him said he was the type to smile through the pain. A father, a friend, a man who just wanted to do better. And then came the $200 drug debt. A small sum, but enough to light the fuse. Prosecutors later said that debt was owed to Boyd and his associates, men who wanted to make an example out of anyone who dared to cross them. But the defense told a different story, that Boyd was no leader, just a man caught in a situation spinning violently out of control. On a humid July night, Gregory Huguley vanished. Witnesses claimed he was last seen leaving a neighborhood known for drug deals. Hours later, he was driven to a remote field in Talladega County, the kind of place where screams disappear into the night. They tied him up with duct tape, his feet bound, his hands trembling as he begged for his life. And then, in an act that still haunts Alabama's criminal history, someone doused him in gasoline and set him on fire. According to court records, Gregory burned alive, a death so brutal that even seasoned investigators were shaken to silence. In the aftermath, rumors spread through the town like wildfire. People whispered that Boyd was one of the men there that night, that he had taped Gregory's feet together while another man struck the match. But the evidence was thin. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, only the word of one man, a CO defendant who took a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Boyd. That man's story sealed Anthony's fate. He told the court that Boyd was the one who restrained Gregory and watched as the flames consumed him. But Boyd insisted he wasn't there, that he was at a party miles away when the murder happened. He claimed the witness lied to save himself, and that's when the case began to divide everyone who heard it. Was this a story of cold-blooded revenge, or the tragic collapse of a young man trapped between loyalty and fear? The courtroom would later call it capital murder, a killing especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. But outside those walls, people began to ask deeper questions. What drove these men to turn so violently on someone over $200? How does a human soul get to the point where another person's life means nothing? Psychologists point to a toxic mix of drug culture, power, and fear, a world where acts of dominance replace empathy, and where one wrong debt could become a death sentence. Gregory Huguley's family never recovered. His mother, according to court documents, said she still saw her son's face in her dreams, sometimes burning, sometimes just smiling the way he used to before the streets claimed him. She described his death as a punishment no one deserved, not even his killers. For 30 years, Boyd sat on death row, still proclaiming his innocence. But that night, the one that began with a $200 argument, had already defined his destiny. It's one of those stories that makes you pause and ask, what really happened in that dark field? Was Boyd truly guilty, or was he the easiest one to blame? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because what comes next is even more shocking. The courtroom was cold, silent, heavy with the weight of a death row murder case that had gripped Alabama for months. Anthony Todd Boyd stood before the judge, accused of one of the most horrifying crimes in the state's history, the brutal killing of Gregory Huguley, a man burned alive over a $200 debt. Prosecutors painted Boyd as the ringleader, ruthless, heartless, the man who gave the order. They replayed every gruesome detail, every scream, every second Gregory suffered. The jury sat frozen as they listened, their faces pale with disbelief. But Boyd's defense told another story. They said the witnesses lied to save themselves, men who had already made deals with the state. No fingerprints, no DNA, no physical evidence linking Boyd directly to the fire. Only testimonies, shaky, inconsistent, desperate. Still, in the eyes of the court, that didn't matter. Alabama had seen enough blood, enough tragedy. Someone had to pay. After hours of deliberation, the verdict was read, guilty of capital murder. Boyd's mother wept as the sentence followed, death by lethal injection, later changed to nitrogen gas execution when Alabama introduced its new execution method. The state claimed it was more humane. Human rights groups called it experimental torture. As appeals came and went, Boyd maintained his innocence. In letters from death row, he wrote about faith, redemption, and forgiveness, not anger. God knows the truth, he said, even if the world never will. But time, in death penalty cases, moves slowly. Years became decades, appeals denied, clemency rejected. Each legal defeat brought Boyd closer to the final hours of his life. Journalists who visited him said he seemed calm, not broken, not bitter. He spoke about Gregory Huguley's family with sorrow, not hate. Do you think Anthony Todd Boyd truly deserved the death penalty, or was he a victim of a flawed system built on revenge? After 3 decades on death row, the clock finally ran out for Anthony Todd Boyd. It was a cold Alabama morning, the kind that makes the air feel heavier, like even the sky knows what's about to happen. Inside the Holman Correctional Facility, Boyd's final hours began. At 4 a.m. the guards opened his cell. Boyd had already been awake. He spent the night reading his Bible, writing one last letter to his sister, the only person who still wrote him back after all these years. He asked for no special last meal, only coffee. "I've already had enough of the world," he told one officer. The new execution method, nitrogen gas asphyxiation, had only been used once before in America. For Boyd, that made his case part of history, or, as critics said, a grim experiment. Alabama called it quick and painless, but no one truly knew. Not even the men ordered to carry it out. At 6 p.m., witnesses filed in, journalists, officials, a few quiet observers. Boyd walked in calmly, dressed in white, no resistance, no words of anger. Only silence. He looked at the glass separating him from the viewing room and nodded once, as if saying goodbye to the world that had already forgotten him. When asked for his final words, Boyd's voice cracked but remained steady. He said, "I forgive everyone who's ever lied on me, and I pray for Gregory's family. I'm sorry for the pain, whether I caused it or not. God will judge me now." Then came the moment of truth. The hood was placed over his head, connected to the nitrogen system. A guard pressed the button. Within seconds, Boyd's body tensed. Witnesses said he breathed heavily, then went still. The silence that followed was suffocating, eerie, eternal. And just like that, Anthony Todd Boyd was gone. Outside, protesters held signs, some reading justice for Gregory, others stopped state killings. Inside, prison staff filed their reports and went home. Another name crossed off Alabama's death penalty list. But the questions didn't fade. Had Alabama really found a more humane way to end a human life? Or had they turned execution into something even colder? a science experiment wrapped in legality. Boyd's death reignited national debate. Justice served, or system failed again. In the end, there were no winners, only echoes of pain on both sides of the glass. Gregory Huguley burned alive in a field, his screams haunting Alabama for decades. Anthony Todd Boyd spent 30 years waiting for the state to end his life, his final hours filled with prayers, not vengeance. 2 men, 2 deaths, one endless question: what does justice really mean? Did the punishment fit the crime, or did the system fail again? Drop your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the haunting world of death row, final hours, and the execution stories that force us to confront what justice really costs.